Before the ships came, before the chains fell, before the world rewrote her name, Africa was not silent. She was golden. She was powerful. She was home to kings, queens, scholars, and warriors. AfricaniStory is a journey into the true epic of a continent, too often defined by suffering but born of greatness. From the towering walls of Great Zimbabwe to the wisdom libraries of Timbuktu, from the dynasties of Nubia to the empires of Mali. And beneath this is not just history. This is legacy, royalty, resistance, genius. This is the AfricaniStory, a bold retelling of who we were and who we still are. The idea of human bondage, of one person owning another as property, seems so unthinkable in today's world that it can be difficult to imagine how such a practice could ever have begun. And yet slavery has been with humanity for as long as we've been around. So where did it start, and how did we come to accept such a horrific institution? This is the inception of human bondage. Economic factors such as the need for labor on plantations or in mines could have contributed to the development of slavery. Social factors such as racial or ethnic prejudice and the desire for power and control over others may have played a role. Political factors such as the desire to maintain social order and stability could have also contributed to the emergence of slavery. How did we go from not owning other people to owning other people? In many cultures, prisoners of war or people who are captured by slavers are also considered to be property. This means that slavery can be the result of conquest or of the slave trade. What exactly are we talking about when we say slavery? Social factors such as racial or ethnic prejudice and the desire for power and control over others may have played a role. Understanding the motivations behind slavery can help us to better understand how and why it began. Political factors such as the desire to maintain social order and stability could have also contributed to the emergence of slavery. In some societies, slavery was based on race or ethnicity. In others, it was based on gender or sexual orientation. And in still others, it was based on economic status. Although it has been abolished in many countries, it still exists in various forms around the world. It's important to use respectful language and to avoid perpetuating harmful stereotypes or misconceptions. We must also be mindful of the emotional impact that this topic can have on individuals and communities. You might want to try reading books or articles about the history of slavery or the experiences of those who have been enslaved. You could also look into organizations that are working to end modern slavery and see how you can get involved. By understanding how slavery began, we can better work to prevent its continuation in the future. Their stories and perspectives are essential to understanding the true cost of slavery and the importance of fighting for justice and equality. What role did economic factors play in the development of slavery? How did social and cultural attitudes towards slavery vary across different societies? What role did religion play in the development of slavery? How did political factors contribute to the emergence of slavery? If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing for more educational content. And if you have any thoughts or comments on the topic, please feel free to share them below. We look forward to seeing you in our next video. By considering these questions, we can gain a better understanding of how and why slavery began. We must also consider the role that culture and religion played in the development of slavery. In some cultures, slavery was seen as a necessary part of society and even endorsed by religious leaders. This helped to create a social and cultural environment in which slavery was accepted and even encouraged. Bondage is a state of being bound or held in captivity. It is a more general term than slavery. We must also consider the role that economic, social, and political factors played in the development of slavery in each society, and can refer to any situation in which a person is not free to move or act as they please. Generally speaking, slavery is a form of forced labor in which one person or entity owns another person and has complete control over their actions and movements. We must first look at the concept of human property. Humans can become property in a variety of ways. One way is through birth. In many societies, children born to enslaved parents are themselves enslaved. This means that slavery can be hereditary, and a person has no choice but to become a slave if they are born into a slave society. Slaves are often treated as property and are denied basic human rights. This question cannot be answered with any specificity. However, some of the earliest evidence of human bondage comes from ancient Mesopotamia. One possible answer is that as humans evolved from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies, we began to accumulate more wealth and resources than we needed. This led to the development of social hierarchies and eventually to the emergence of slavery. As the concept of private property developed, so did the idea that some people could own other people. This was likely driven by a combination of economic, social, and political factors. Though there are earlier examples of human enslavement, there are records from the Code of Hammurabi dating back to 1750 BC that indicate slaves were bought and sold. They can be bought sold, or traded like any other form of property. This means that slavery is often associated with the buying and selling of humans, and it is often based on economic factors. And there are also records of debts being inherited by family members when someone died. But while these practices existed, they do not specifically describe a system of slavery as we know it. For example, the Code of Hammurabi contains several laws related to the treatment of slaves, indicating that they were considered property rather than human beings. For example, it stated that if a slave was beaten up by his master, the slave's owner would only face a fine of 25 pieces of silver, which indicates that the value of the slave was less than that of the fine. While the Code of Hammurabi does provide us with some insight into how slavery began in Mesopotamia, it doesn't really tell us anything about why it started in the first place. It is important to note that this period in history was quite different from modern times, and slavery looked very different then than it does now. While we may think of slavery as a system in which people are forced to work without pay, this was not always the case. In fact, during this time period, slaves were often paid for their work and were able to earn enough money to buy their freedom or even the freedom of their children. Additionally, slaves were sometimes allowed to own property and even other slaves. Of course, this does not justify slavery, but it is important to understand the nuances of this institution in order to get to the bottom of how and why it started. One theory as to how and why slavery began is that it developed out of a combination of factors, including economic, social, and political conditions. In order to further explore this topic, we must first define our terms. Another term we need to define is bondage. To better understand the inception of human bondage, another way humans can become property is through capture. Once a person has been made a human property, so how do we go from not owning other people to owning other people? Economic factors such as the need for labor on plantations or in mines could have contributed to the development of slavery. As we continue to explore this topic, it's important to keep these factors in mind. It is also important to recognize that slavery is not a monolithic institution, and that different forms of slavery have existed throughout history. To better understand how slavery began, we must look at different cultures and societies and how they viewed slavery. As we continue to explore this topic, it's important to keep in mind the following questions. It's also important to recognize that slavery is not a thing of the past. Exploring this topic requires sensitivity and respect for the experiences of those who have been enslaved, or who are currently living in slavery. We can also learn from the experiences of those who have survived slavery and who have worked to abolish this institution. If you find yourself wanting to learn more, check out the additional resources. Remember, learning about this topic can be challenging and uncomfortable, but it's also essential if we want to create a better future for all of us. Thank you for watching this video on the inception of human bondage.